Okay, so this presentation is about the moral philosophies related to ethical issues in health, which is an Access to HE Health Studies unit. But if you are interested in ethical issues or studying health and social care or philosophy, then perhaps this will be of interest to you too. The first philosophy is called utilitarianism. Utilitarianist thinkers include J.S. Mill and Jeremy Bentham, and utilitarianism believes that we should promote happiness. So it's not about the action itself, it's whether the action promotes happiness or, obviously on the flip side, promotes pain or unhappiness. Utilitarian thinkers want to act in a way that promotes the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. So it's a philosophy of the group, and the group's overall happiness is the thing that they seek. So, you think about the NHS and healthcare measures, they often try to promote the greatest happiness for the greatest number. So, for example, we might ration really expensive treatment in order to use the money in the most wise way to promote the greatest happiness for the greatest number. Critics argue that it's too focused on consequences rather than the intention or doing the right thing. So some things we just, regardless of whether they promote happiness or not, we just think they're right or think they're wrong. So for example, lying. You may be able to make someone feel happy or loved or nice by lying to them. Some people believe that we shouldn't do that, in contrast to utilitarianism. Others say that there are some things that are important, for example, justice, regardless of the outcome. So justice is a deontological idea, isn't it? It's somewhere out there in the universe, justice, rather than about the consequences. For example, you may believe that even a nice person who harms someone should be punished, because it's the just thing to do. One thing you need to be thinking of as we go through this PowerPoint, this presentation, is how does this link to healthcare? In terms of utilitarianism, a good link, an easy link, is statistics. A good example to use in relation to utilitarianism is statistics. So if 7 out of 10 people support something, for example, abortion or euthanasia, then it's the greatest good for the greatest number. As well, things like the COVID vaccination rollout and health spending in general is often utilitarianist. But, disregarding what you're doing and what you're thinking about in relation to health ethics, if it promotes more happiness than unhappiness, then it's a good thing for a utilitarianist. Consequentialism. So consequentialism is related to utilitarianism, because utilitarianism is a type of consequentialism. But consequentialism in general believes that we need to judge an action by its consequences, whether it maximizes the good. So if it produces more good consequences than bad consequences, it's a good thing, no matter what that thing is. Again, it's not about the action itself, it's about the outcome of the action. An action is right if its consequences are better than its alternative's consequences. Thus, an action may be right even if its consequences are very poor, so long as the alternatives are worse. If you think about 2 medications, you choose the one that has the least side effects and the most positive effects. Also things like chemotherapy. Chemotherapy can be really damaging for somebody's body, can make them very, very ill, but it is often better than allowing the cancer to progress. So it doesn't need to be something that produces amazing consequences, just better than the alternative's consequences. Again, think about the scenarios that are related to healthcare. Just giving you an example, but in general, a lot of the treatment that we get is based on consequences, but also, issues in health. For example, euthanasia. A lot of people support euthanasia because they think that it minimizes suffering. Suffering is a consequence. People who think that euthanasia is inherently wrong are not consequentialists. They're not interested in the consequences of an action. Deontology. So deontological ethics are based on duty. Deon means duty, And they often look at inherent rightness or wrongness. It's not about the consequences. It's about whether something is inherently right or wrong. Deontologists often look at moral rules. So they believe that there's a universe of moral rules. They might be religious, for example. Religious people live by rules, the Ten Commandments or whatever else. So it is wrong to steal. In the Bible it says, "Thou shalt not steal." It doesn't say why, but it doesn't really matter because that's the law. It doesn't matter why. Kant said we should do the right thing even if it produces negative consequences. So Kant said that we cannot lie, because if we do lie, then we can't expect anyone else to tell the truth either. So it wouldn't really make sense to lie. It's not about the consequences of the action. It's about the action itself is inherently wrong. Again, come up with a scenario to illustrate deontological ethics within a healthcare setting. An example is people's opposition to things like abortion and euthanasia. Some people think that even if it minimizes suffering, even if it is what the person wants, that euthanasia should not be allowed because it's wrong. You don't have to be religious to believe this sort of thing, but I guess it does help. But we all have some things that we believe are just inherently wrong. Anything that's a rule as well within the healthcare system is a deontological thing. So, for example, confidentiality law. We don't keep people's data confidential because of the consequences of it. It's just because of the principle, because it's right. Postmodern ethics. It's not based upon universal or unchanging principles. So it's kind of the opposite to deontology. Postmodern ethics believes that things can change and there's no such thing as right and wrong, and things are constantly changing. They believe in relativism. What is true is contextual. It's based on a particular society's or a particular group's view, and this can change. Every culture can have its own set of ethics. It's not about an external thing like God or the Bible or whatever telling you what to believe. Things are constantly changing, constantly in flux. Key thinkers include Jean-François Lyotard. He's a French philosopher. Look him up if you've not heard of him. And again, linking to healthcare, things like we live in a society with lots of different types of people. So, in hospitals, we might have prayer rooms and things like that to take account of the fact that there are Christians and Muslims and Jewish people. But also in relation to a social issue, everyone will believe a slightly different thing. And that's fine for a postmodernist. It's a good thing. It means that people's thoughts are taken account of, if you like, in the society that we live in now. You can stop there if you just want the basics. This is an example of one of Kant's ideas. It's called the categorical imperative. And Kant is a deontologist, as you know. And basically, Kant thought that some things we just have to do. And it's just because we have to do them. So he distinguishes between two different types of imperative: a hypothetical imperative and a categorical imperative. A hypothetical imperative is something that we have to do in order to get something else or because of some other reason. So, for example, if we are hungry, we have to eat dinner. Okay? Whereas a categorical imperative is something that we just have to do because we have to do it. So there is an imperative which, without being based on and conditioned by any further purpose to be attained by a certain line of conduct, enjoins this conduct immediately. This imperative is categorical. It's not about what we ought to do to get something else or because of some other interest. It's just something that we ought to do. And Kant came up with a famous maxim or saying that he could use to explain that. So there's only one categorical imperative. Act only on the maxim through which you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. Okay, so what Kant means by that is essentially only do stuff that you think everybody else should be able to do, and that we should be able to make it a universal law. Anything that you can will to be a universal law is a categorical imperative, e.g., or i.e., you have to do it. Okay, so for example, if you believe that you can will or say that other people should be able to lie, that everybody should be able to lie, then you can lie, or you should lie, actually. If you don't believe that, you cannot do it. Okay? So this example here, I'm not going to read it out, but obviously it's on the screen. But the example that he gives is, if you wanted to borrow money and you could lie and say that you could pay it back even if you couldn't, should you? Okay? And he goes on to say basically that if you did come to the conclusion that you would lie, then what you would be saying there is everybody else could lie about being able to pay back the loan if they couldn't. Therefore, the whole point of promising to pay back a loan would become meaningless, and the people who lent the money would know that, and therefore nobody would be able to lend any money, and nobody would be able to borrow any money. Therefore, we cannot will that to be a universal law. Therefore, we shouldn't promise to pay back money if we can't. Okay? So basically what Kant is saying with this idea of the categorical imperative is, it makes no sense not to behave morally. Because if we were to lie about something, we can only expect other people to do that, and the whole concept of truth will no longer exist, and therefore it's irrational to lie. So we can't lie. Okay? It's a slightly different... Kant wasn't religious, so he's not looking at a religious backup for right and wrong. He's looking at it from the perspective of reason and rationality. So again, just an example. And I think the example is applicable to health, but healthcare examples in terms of only act if you think it should be a universal law. Think abortion. Okay, can you will that everybody has an abortion? Well, no, you can't. Therefore, people shouldn't have abortions, because if one person has an abortion, then they are saying that everybody should have an abortion, which makes no sense, and therefore we can't have abortions. I think the difficulty with this, though, is it depends how you interpret it. Because, for example, you could say, if somebody had been raped, then they could will that everybody who had been raped should be able to have an abortion, and therefore having an abortion in some certain circumstances is okay. Okay, so there's no right or wrong answer to how you interpret these things necessarily, but just to illustrate that you can interpret in different ways. So yeah, that's the end. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.